Welcome in, everyone. We have a really fascinating mission for you on the deep dive today. We are looking into, well, it's an entirely invisible form of workplace effort.
Completely invisible and entirely unpaid, which is wild to think about.
Right, unpaid, unacknowledged, all of it. We are pulling from this really powerful Substack article today.
By Dr. Jaime Hoerricks, right?
Yes, Dr. Jaime Hoerricks. It's titled Translation Labor, the Work of Translating a Whole Mind.
Such a striking title. It really grabs you.
It really does. And I want to ask you, the listener, right out of the gate, have you ever felt like you have to, I don't know, fundamentally restructure your own thoughts just to survive in a professional setting?
Oh, I think a lot of people are going to relate to that feeling immediately.
Right. Like you already have the answer. You see the entire complex system perfectly in your head. But because the room operates on a totally different, let's call it a cognitive operating system.
Different system entirely.
You have to work backwards. You have to painstakingly build this linear bridge just so everyone else can walk across it.
It is a profound kind of cognitive friction. And what makes this text so compelling is how it isolates a phenomenon that goes entirely unnoticed by the majority of people.
Because they just never have to do it.
Exactly. They simply never have to perform it. The title alone, Translating a Whole Mind, gets right to the sheer scale of the labor involved here.
Yeah, we are not talking about casually adjusting your vocabulary for a different audience, like using simpler words.
No, not at all. We're talking about taking an entire interconnected architecture of thought and forcing it through a very narrow, sequential funnel.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core conflict Dr. Hoerricks sets up immediately is this tension between two fundamentally different ways of processing the world.
Right.
On one side, you have what the text calls pattern-first understanding.
Yes.
And on the other, you have the stepwise language institutions recognize.
That's the crucial phrase there. Stepwise language.
And for those of you listening who are late-identified Gestalt processors, you already know the exhaustion of this dynamic intimately.
You live it every day.
But let's look at how this actually manifests day to day, because it is essentially like trying to explain the architecture of a complex neural network to an institution that only understands, like, linear spreadsheet macros.
That is the perfect way to frame it, honestly.
Yeah.
Because it highlights the technological mismatch at play here.
Right.
Institutional spaces, corporate boardrooms, academia, government agencies, they are inherently designed around stepwise progression.
They have to be, right, to function at that scale.
Exactly. They require predictability and standardization to scale up. Just think about the infrastructure of professional life, the agendas, the standardized project management software, forcing you to create tickets in a specific sequence.
Oh, the endless sequential slide decks.
The slide decks. The assumption built into the very foundation of these systems is that thought must be linear. You start at step one, you proceed to step two, and eventually you arrive at the conclusion.
But wait, let's ground this a bit. How does this actually play out in real time?
Sure.
Because the text mentions rewriting emails and translating insights into steps. If we are being highly critical here, rewriting an email just sounds like standard professional editing, making it look nice for the boss. Where is the line between normal corporate communication and this exhaustive translation labor?
That's a great question. The distinction lies in the architectural translation. Standard editing is about clarity. Choosing a better verb, tightening a run-on sentence.
Grammar check.
Yeah, grammar. But translation labor, as Dr. Hoerricks describes it, is about suppressing the pattern-first understanding just to isolate a single step.
Okay, so breaking that down.
A Gestalt processor looks at a problem and instantly sees the finished state. They see the overarching web. They see how marketing impacts the supply chain, which then impacts human resources.
They see the whole board at once.
Exactly. Their natural first draft of an email contains that entire holistic web because, to them, taking out any single node distorts the truth of the whole pattern.
Oh, wow. So they write out the whole pattern and then look at it and realize my stepwise manager is going to reject this outright because it doesn't follow the A to B to C format.
Precisely. The institution practically demands that they dismantle their own holistic insight.
Yeah.
They have to hide the overarching pattern and artificially construct, say, 5 easily digestible sequential bullet points just to get the email read.
Just to get it opened.
The text describes this as converting pattern-first understanding into the language institutions accept.
Accept.
Yes, that word accept implies a very strict gatekeeping mechanism.
It is entirely gatekeeping by formatting. And if you do not perform this translation labor, your ideas, no matter how brilliant or accurate or innovative the pattern might be, they are simply denied entry into the conversation.
They don't even make it to the table.
You get labeled as scattered or confusing or not a team player.
Which brings us to the immense emotional weight of the phrase late identified in this text.
Yes, let's talk about that.
If you are a late identified Gestalt processor, you've likely spent decades moving through these stepwise institutions, believing that you were simply bad at communicating.
Believing it was a personal failing.
Exactly. You likely thought you were slower or easily overwhelmed or inexplicably exhausted by tasks that seemed completely effortless to your peers.
Yeah.
The revelation in this text is that you weren't failing. You were doing a second, entirely invisible job on top of the actual work.
You are essentially compiling the code manually in your head before the software can even run, while everyone else just gets to double-click the app.
That's it.
Of course you're going to be exhausted. And to ground this abstract theory, Dr. Hoerricks brings us into a highly relatable, real-world anecdote.
Oh, the anecdote is so telling.
It really is. They describe a very specific scenario. Quote, "A few days before the weekly teachers' meeting, a slide deck arrives in my inbox. Now, on the surface, getting a slide deck before a meeting sounds like the most mundane administrative detail ever.
What's fascinating here is that it does sound mundane, until you look at the exact wording Dr. Hoerricks uses to describe how that email came to be.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Look at the wording here. It's brilliant. The text states, "This does not happen automatically."
It's not the default.
No. The author explains that receiving these slides early is, quote, "simply a courtesy. I negotiated with one specific colleague. One small accommodation worked out quietly over time."
Wow.
Just think about the gravity of that. It is not a formal policy. It is not an institutional system update that helps everyone.
It is a courtesy negotiated quietly.
Yes, the sheer precariousness of that arrangement is fascinating.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, because it exposes a massive systemic blind spot.
Huge blind spot.
The institution itself is completely oblivious to the fact that a Gestalt processor requires this material in advance just to function effectively in a stepwise meeting.
It doesn't even see the need.
Like you said, it is a delicate interpersonal favor. You just have to hope you have a nice, understanding coworker in your department.
And relying on back-channel negotiations for basic professional functioning is a deeply unstable way to exist in a workplace.
Very.
It places the entire burden of advocacy squarely on the individual. Think about the hidden effort involved just to set up that accommodation in the first place.
It's exhausting just to think about.
The Gestalt processor has to identify their own cognitive need, then figure out a logistical solution, then approach a colleague.
Right, and explain the need without sounding demanding.
Or without receiving a formal HR accommodation. They have to do it under the radar and then maintain that positive social relationship indefinitely so the courtesy continues week after week.
It is terrifying when you think about how fragile that lifeline is. What happens when that one specific friendly colleague leaves the company?
Oh, it all falls apart.
Or what happens if a new manager takes over who loves the element of surprise?
The surprise manager, yes.
The one who insists on keeping the slide deck a secret until the meeting starts to keep things fresh.
In a nightmare scenario.
That small accommodation evaporates instantly. The house of cards collapses because the institution hasn't actually changed its structure to be inclusive. It is just blindly tolerating a workaround.
Exactly. The text explicitly notes, quote, "The system does not formally recognize the support need behind the request."
System doesn't care.
The system assumes that real-time, stepwise processing is the default and only valid way to consume information. So when that new manager hides the slides, the Gestalt processor is suddenly thrown back into the deep end. They are forced to perform real-time translation on the fly, which often leads to freezing up or being unable to contribute during the actual hour of the meeting.
And then they get blamed for not participating. We always hear that classic corporate complaint, this meeting could have been an email.
Right, everyone says that.
But reading this text, it is almost the exact opposite for the Gestalt processor. It is more like, this email requires 3 days of solitary mental preparation before I can even survive the meeting.
That is so true.
Which brings us to the core of the hidden work itself. Why is getting that slide deck a few days early so incredibly vital?
Dr. Hoerricks provides a very direct, powerful answer to that. Receiving the slides early allows them to do something most people in the room will never even consider doing.
Yeah.
I am going to quote the text directly here. It gives me time to prepare the translation.
Prepare the translation. That paints such a vivid, almost heavy picture of the physical reality of this hidden labor.
That's very heavy.
Imagine sitting down with that deck on a Friday afternoon for a meeting that doesn't happen until Tuesday. For the stepwise thinkers in the room, the meeting is just an hour on their Tuesday calendar.
They don't think about it until Tuesday at 9 a.m.
Right. They show up, they look at the screen, they process the linear bullet points as they appear, and they leave.
But for the Gestalt processor, the meeting actually started days prior. They have to sit in silence and manually convert the upcoming stepwise presentation into a holistic pattern their brain can hold.
They have to reverse engineer it.
Exactly. Or, perhaps more exhaustively, they had to figure out how to slice up their own holistic pattern-first feedback into the sequential linear steps the presenters will expect to hear on Tuesday.
Oh, man.
They have to map out the nodes, suppress the overarching connections that the stepwise room will just deem off-topic, and force a sequential narrative.
It is an incredible amount of effort to expend before anyone has even said hello in the conference room. And let's talk about the downstream effects of this, because the text emphasizes that this is quiet, unpaid work.
This raises an important question for anyone evaluating workplace equity and performance metrics. How much of our institutional energy is being completely wasted by forcing people to engage in this cognitive friction?
So much of it.
Every hour spent translating a natural Gestalt understanding into a rigid, stepwise format is an hour not spent on actual innovation, complex problem-solving, or deep creative thinking.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, it is entirely unpaid.
It is literally unpaid labor. If you are spending 3 hours over the weekend preparing your translation just so you can walk into a 1-hour meeting on Monday without feeling entirely lost,
You're working for free.
you are working significantly more hours than your stepwise colleagues for the exact same salary. And the exhaustion compounds.
It compounds because it doesn't show up on a timesheet. It doesn't get factored into performance reviews. In fact, if we look at how performance reviews are structured, they often penalize the Gestalt processor.
Because they measure the wrong things.
Exactly. If the translation labor isn't performed perfectly, the employee gets dinged for communication issues or lacking focus.
Right, despite having a superior holistic understanding of the project.
The emotional weight of having to constantly translate your whole mind before you step through the door means you are perpetually operating with a baseline level of depletion.
You're running on empty.
You are spending your entire cognitive budget building the bridge, leaving nothing left for the actual destination.
And the people running the meeting have absolutely no idea you just spent your weekend building that bridge.
No clue at all.
They just wonder why you seem a little drained or why it takes you a moment to respond when they ask a sudden, highly specific, linear question that forces you to abruptly switch back into stepwise translation mode.
It's jarring.
It is the ultimate irony of modern corporate culture. Companies constantly claim they want out-of-the-box thinking, and they desperately want innovation.
Everyone wants innovation.
But their internal plumbing is so rigid that it only accepts square, stepwise inputs.
Which goes back to the concept of the whole mind that Dr. Hoerricks references in the title. When a Gestalt processor encounters a new piece of information, their brain automatically tries to connect it to every other piece of information they hold.
They see the whole web.
They build a comprehensive framework. But a stepwise meeting demands that they actively ignore the vast majority of that framework.
Yeah.
They must focus only on the immediate, isolated step being discussed on slide 4. The translation labor isn't just about constructing steps for others. It is actively suppressing the broader pattern so as not to overwhelm the institution's accepted language.
You literally have to shrink the way you see the world to fit through the institutional keyhole. You have to actively suppress your own intelligence to make others comfortable.
It is an act of intellectual diminishment demanded by the system. And it is entirely normalized.
Totally normalized.
The system assumes its way of communicating is the default objective reality, rather than just one specific cognitive style that happened to build the institutions first.
So what does this all mean? As we synthesize everything Dr. Hoerricks has shared in these excerpts, the main takeaway is undeniable.
It really is.
We have this profound realization that for many people, specifically late-identified Gestalt or pattern-first thinkers, simply existing and participating in traditional institutional spaces requires a massive, unacknowledged layer of translation labor.
Massive.
It is a second job you never applied for but have to work every single day just to participate.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the implications for organizational design are staggering. True systemic support should not and cannot rely on an individual's ability to quietly negotiate back-channel courtesies with his single friendly colleague just to get a slide deck early.
Right. That's not a real system.
Not at all. If an institution's communication style is inherently exclusionary to a specific cognitive processing type, then it is the institution that is fundamentally broken, not the individual.
Yeah.
The system needs to formally recognize these support needs, rather than passively relying on the unpaid labor of the employee to constantly bridge the gap.
For those of you listening right now, if you have ever walked out of a meeting feeling inexplicably drained, not because the actual work was hard, but because the rigid steps required to share your patterns took absolutely everything out of you, you are not crazy.
You're really not.
You are not alone. And as Dr. Hoerricks so painfully points out, it is literally unpaid labor.
It is a profound paradigm shift to finally recognize that hidden effort for what it actually is. And as we wrap up our analysis of this text, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If our schools, our corporations, and our institutions strictly demand stepwise communication in order for anyone to simply function within them, what kind of groundbreaking, world-shifting, pattern-first innovations are we entirely missing out on, simply because the burden of translation was just too heavy for those brilliant minds to carry?
Wow. That really leaves you thinking. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take care of yourselves, and we will catch you next time.